I was raised in church since I was 3 weeks old. I remember being a very young teenager and all of a sudden having this faith crisis. We had these little pamphlets, this literature in the church addressing various questions that people might have. And one of the pamphlets was titled, "Does God Really Exist?" or something like that. And I remember being embarrassed, feeling like I needed to pick one of those up and not wanting anyone to see me pick one of those up, which is why I did it in secret. Perhaps I did not feel like I had been granted permission to have doubts as a Christian. But I had begun to wonder about the truth of the religion I had been born into in America. Because, if God does exist, then my relationship with God is the most important thing in my life, hands down. But if God doesn't exist, then I've been greatly deceived all my life, right? And so is most of the human population on earth. I love to sing the hymn in church, that there is a God, He is alive. That was my confession, at least publicly. But did I really mean it? I wasn't sure. And the fear that I was being dishonest, insincere, that troubled me. Eventually, that little agnostic crisis subsided. It was a pretty dark place while it lasted, but eventually came out of that, came into Christian theism, Christian theology, albeit a far from perfect, in fact, quite unhealthy theology at times. This is around high school. Fast forward, went to college, studied Bible and ministry, which completely upended so much of what I thought I knew for the better. And I can safely say today that I am convinced it is completely rational to live a Christian life. In fact, I would say it may be irrational not to live a Christian life. But for some of you, I know what you're thinking. You may be thinking that you should abstain from a Christian life before you stumble across some rock-solid evidence for the truth of Christianity. Okay. Maybe this illustration would be helpful to you. Think about a man who hesitates to ask his girlfriend he's been dating for years and years to marry him. Okay, he deeply loves her. He knows that, she knows that. But he's hesitating to pop the question because he's not perfectly sure that she's going to be the angel he's dreamed of after he brings her home. Okay. I think a lot of married people would testify. It is completely reasonable to pull the trigger on making a lifelong commitment to that person that you love, despite the absence of airtight evidence that the marriage is going to be a happy one. Okay. Even when absolute certainty is something that you're just not going to get. Applying this to the question of God. Even if the evidence for God leaves some room for doubt, when you consider the possible value of a relationship with God, that just might favor the decision to live a Christian life, and here's why. Blaise Pascal, mathematician, theologian, gives an argument for those who aren't sure if Christianity is true or not, but think that it might be true. Okay, it goes like this. It is rational to seek relationship with God and live a Christian life because there is so much to gain and relatively little to lose. What's to gain? Eternal happiness. Plus, if you commit to God and God does in fact exist, then not only are you bringing joy to God, you're helping others have relationship with God. And if Jesus really is who he claimed to be, and therefore Christianity is true, well, that might be a moral duty, right? To live a Christian life, to love God. Why? Because he's the source of every good thing that we have, James tells us. On the other hand, Christianity turns out not to be true, then have I still lived a meaningful life as a Christian? Did I just throw my life away? I would say absolutely not. Absolutely not. I would have lived a great life, right? That's a great life, pursuing moral excellence, enjoying the many well-attested benefits of belonging to a religious community. Okay. Lots to gain, relatively little to lose. So if I were you, I would wrestle. I would wrestle with some of the latest cutting-edge research from philosophy, psychology, sociology. Okay. Now wrestle with the objections also. Objections like the cost of committing to a Christian life being too high, or the existence of religions other than Christianity nullifies the argument, or maybe Christian doctrine itself is a problem for you. Take a look at all that, and then, be fair, take a careful look at arguments for the existence of God, right? For the truth of Christianity. I think what you're going to find is that once you no longer demand certainty for yourself, you're going to find that the available evidence is more than sufficient to make living a Christian life very reasonable. Okay, so here's another argument. If Christianity has at least a 50% chance of being true, a coin flip, then it is still rational to live a Christian life. Christianity does, in fact, have at least a 50% chance of being true. Therefore, it is rational to live a Christian life. So give the evidence for the view that there is a God a good look over, because over the last several decades, even scientists have come to realize that our universe is such that if several features had been just a tad bit off from what they are, just a smidge off, then the self-reproducing life that we have would not have been able to come about. No chance. This is what we call the fine-tuning argument in Christian philosophy. Okay? So wrestle with that. Wrestle with the probability that our universe is the product of an intelligence. Also, wrestle with the strongest alternative to design, right? The multiverse, the idea that our universe is just one of a great number of universes, most of which do not permit life. Obviously, you're going to have to wrestle with some arguments against the view that there is a God, like the argument that God seems hidden from us. Why doesn't he just poke his head out of the sky and wave at us, dissolving all doubt? Right? You're going to have to wrestle with the problem of evil. Perhaps that's the most formidable obstacle to faith. Then if I were you, I would take a good look at the resurrection of Jesus. Of course, that's just one of many Christian doctrines, but it holds a pretty foundational place, doesn't it? Because if Jesus did, in fact, rise from the dead, then you have reason to believe, based on that his teachings when he was on earth have the divine stamp of approval and are therefore true. So in a way, you could say that an argument for the resurrection is an argument for Christianity being true. And if you can pull the plug on the resurrection, then everything else just collapses. Now, while I think that the evidence by itself is more than sufficient to justify belief in Christianity, you don't have to agree with me on that for Pascal's argument to check out. You don't have to agree with me on that, you see, because all that is required to demonstrate that living a Christian life is rational is that the evidence render Christianity at least as likely as it is not likely. Okay. I am here to testify after years of undergraduate seminary, now in graduate seminary. If I've learned one thing, it's how much I don't know, because it's God we're talking about, right? But I have learned that Christianity is something that can satisfy both the head and the heart. Right? Jesus said, I've come that you may have life and have it more abundantly, or just have it abundantly, full stop. Where does that come from? Well, it's something that flows out of having a close personal relationship with God, a relationship that brings comfort, a relationship that brings this peace, this shalom that this life need never take away. Okay. Why do I believe in God? Because I've experienced the love of God. Okay. Sure, the philosophical arguments for the existence of God have their place. The teleological, the cosmological, the ontological, the moral argument. Okay. I'm a fan of all that, but this may surprise you. Those arguments are not why I believe in God. I believe in God, as our resident philosopher here on campus says, not because of those four arguments, but because I've experienced the love of God. In the 60s and 70s, most of philosophy regarded Christian belief as irrational. Well, guess what? Things have changed. In recent decades, Christian philosophers have been very busy, very productive, defending the rationality of Christian faith, answering objections to Christian doctrine, improving traditional arguments for the existence of God, and formulating new ones. So if you are at all interested in the evidence for God, or more specifically, the evidence for Christianity, I highly encourage you to check this stuff out and give it a shot. Happy Saturday to you.